The summer air along the James River did not blow, it clung. It was a suffocating blanket woven from tidal humidity, rotting pine needles, and the pungent reek of curing tobacco leaf. In the year of our Lord 1640, the Virginia colony was not a place of grand marble halls or heroic ideals. It was a brutal mud-choked outpost on the edge of a vast and untamed continent, driven by a single obsession, brown gold. Across the Atlantic, King Charles I was losing his grip on England, embroiled in political turmoil that would soon ignite the English Civil War. But 3,000 miles away in the Tidewater region of North America, the local aristocracy cared little for the divine right of kings. They cared about acreage, yield, and labor on a sprawling plantation near the settlement of Hugh Gwynn. The day began long before the sun cleared the canopy of virgin oak and hickory. Among those who labored in the humid dirt was a man known simply as John Punch. John was an African, brought across the stormy expanse of the Atlantic at a time when the legal framework of American society was still fluid. In 1640, the institution of permanent inherited racial slavery did not officially exist in English common law. The colony relied instead on a system of indentured servitude. Under this brutal arrangement, poor Europeans, convicted felons, kidnapped street urchins from London, and captured Africans were all bound by contracts, usually lasting 4 to 7 years. They cleared the thick forests, tilled the rich soil, planted tobacco seedlings, and died by the thousands from malaria, dysentery, and sheer exhaustion. In the eyes of the overseer's whip, their suffering was identical. They slept in the same cramped, dirt-floored hovels, ate the same meager rations of cornmeal and salt pork, and nursed the same burning hatred for the men who owned their time. John Punch was a man of quiet observation and iron resolve. He understood the economics of the colony far better than his masters assumed. He watched as wealthy planters accumulated thousands of acres by exploiting the headright system, receiving 50 acres of land for every servant they imported across the sea. He saw how human lives were traded like livestock, mortgaged to buy more seed, and worked to the bone before their contracts could expire. Beside John in the long tobacco rows worked Victor, a tall, lean Dutchman with sun-bleached hair and weathered hands, and James Gregory, a Scotsman whose body bore the scars of years of hard labor. Victor had fled poverty in the Low Countries only to find himself trapped in the swampy heat of Virginia. James had been swept up in political unrest in the British Isles and sold across the ocean to satisfy a debt. Different as their origins were, their present reality was identical. They were the engine of the new world, and they were being consumed alive by it. As the sun reached its zenith, casting blinding glare over the river, James wiped sweat from his eyes with a dirty sleeve and muttered under his breath, 4 more years of this, and they'll be burying me under the weeds beside the old barn. The master promised extra months on my time, just for breaking an ox yoke last spring. Victor did not look up from his work, his hoe cutting rhythmically into the earth. He'll keep adding years until you're too old to walk, Scotsman. That is the game. They write the contracts, and they hold the pen. John Punch listened, his eyes sweeping the tree line at the edge of the plantation. Beyond the cleared fields lay a wild, dense wilderness that stretched north toward Maryland, a colony founded by Lord Baltimore, where borders were porous and rumors of freedom whispered through the woods. The contracts do not matter if we are not here to read them, John said softly. In that quiet moment in the middle of a Virginia tobacco field, an alliance was born, not along lines of blood, nation, or color, but forged in the shared fire of human desperation. The escape took place under the cover of a moonless July night. A heavy thunderstorm had rolled over the Tidewater, turning the dirt tracks into streams of mud and masking the sound of their movements. John, Victor, and James met behind the curing barns when the plantation house had gone dark. They carried almost nothing: a single iron knife, a small pouch of parched corn, and 2 leather canteens filled with river water. They moved like ghosts through the pine woods, heading north-northwest. John led the way, using his keen sense of direction and the moss on the north side of the ancient trunks to guide them through the gloom. By dawn, they were deep inside the swampy borderlands between Virginia and Maryland. Their boots were soaked through, their skin torn by briars and swarming with clouds of mosquitoes. But as the morning light filtered through the thick canopy of cypress trees, a feeling they had forgotten surged through their veins. Liberty! For 3 days, the unlikely trio survived on wild berries, raw corn, and sheer willpower. They shared their food equally, took turns keeping watch through the shivering nights, and helped one another across treacherous marshlands. In those 3 days, there was no master and no servant, no European and no African. They were 3 men claiming the natural right to own their own bodies. However, Hugh Gwynn was not a man to accept the loss of his property. The flight of 3 valuable laborers was an insult to his authority and a direct hit to his balance sheet. He assembled a posse of armed men, equipped with horses, muskets, and tracking dogs, and sent them north with orders to bring the fugitives back in chains. On the 4th evening, just as the escapees reached the perimeter of a small settlement near the Maryland border, surrounded, exhausted, and outnumbered, John Punch, Victor, and James Gregory were thrown to the muddy ground, bound tightly with hemp rope, and dragged back toward Jamestown. On July 9, 1640, the Governor's Council convened in Jamestown. The air inside the wooden courthouse was thick with heat and the heavy scent of pipe tobacco. Sitting at the front of the room were the most powerful men in the colony, Governor John Harvey and his council of wealthy landowning planters. To these men, the 3 bound prisoners standing before them were more than just runaways. They were a dangerous symptom of a growing problem. Across Virginia, indentured servants were beginning to realize their collective strength. Poor whites and Africans were intermarrying, working together, and occasionally rebelling together. If the lower classes united, the small elite of wealthy planters would be overwhelmed. The clerk read the charges: desertion of service, theft of their master's time, and defying the laws of the colony of Virginia. Hugh Gwynn took the stand, demanding full compensation for his lost labor and an exemplary punishment. The council conferred in whispers. The law regarding runaway indentured servants was clear. Standard punishment involved extending the period of servitude. Finally, the governor raised his hand for silence and read the verdict. For Victor, the Dutchman, the court ruled that he should serve his master for 1 additional year, and after that, serve the colony for 3 more years. For James Gregory, the Scotsman, the court handed down an identical sentence: 1 extra year to his master, followed by 3 years of public service. Both European men had a date on the calendar when they would stand as free men. Then the governor turned his gaze toward John Punch. The room fell dead silent save for the buzzing of flies against the glassless windows. The governor read the sentence that would alter the course of Western history, whereas John Punch, a Negro, did not only run away himself, but did also entice 2 other servants to run away with him. It is ordered that the said John Punch shall serve his said master or his assigns for the time of his natural life here or elsewhere. John Punch stood motionless. He looked directly into the eyes of the judges who had just separated his fate from that of his brothers in arms. With those few words written upon parchment, the legal system of the English colonies had drawn a permanent, uncrossable line based on blood and origin. Victor and James were men who had broken a contract. John Punch was condemned to be a slave for the rest of his natural days. The gavel fell with a heavy wooden thud, echoing through the small Jamestown courtroom like a thunderclap. For Victor and James, the sentence was a crushing blow. 4 extra years added to their grueling youth, but there was light at the end of their dark tunnel. 4 years had a beginning, a middle, and an end. For John Punch, time ceased to be a line. It became a boundless, inescapable circle. As the guards escorted the 3 men back out into the sweltering Virginia humidity, the dynamic between them had subtly, tragically shifted. They were no longer 3 escapees standing shoulder to shoulder against a cruel master. The law had cleaved them apart. James looked down at his boots, unable to meet John's eyes. Victor reached out, placing a calloused hand on John's shoulder. But what words could a man offer to someone who had just been sentenced to? Among the wealthy planters, the ruling was quietly celebrated as a stroke of administrative genius. The elite realized they had uncovered a powerful mechanism for control by creating a distinct legal class of lifetime bondage reserved exclusively for Africans. They could effectively neutralize the greatest threat to their wealth, a unified uprising of the working poor. For the indentured servants, however, the message was chilling. The ruling planted a subtle poison into the soil of their camaraderie. Poor European laborers were given a cruel consolation prize. No matter how miserable their lives were, they were taught to whisper to themselves, "At least I am not a slave for life." Decades bled into one another, and the Virginia colony grew like a ravenous beast. The year 1640 had set the precedent, and by the 1660s and 1670s, the Colonial Assembly codified what started with John Punch into formal law. Statute by statute, the legal machinery of chattel slavery was assembled. Children born to enslaved mothers would inherit their status, baptism would no longer confer freedom, and white servants were forbidden from associating with Africans under threat of severe public flogging. Yet despite all the laws designed to keep the poor divided, the greed of the planter aristocracy eventually pushed the colony to the brink of total collapse in 1676 during Bacon's Rebellion. What made Bacon's Rebellion the most terrifying event in early American history was who was fighting side by side in Nathaniel Bacon's rebel army. Once again, armed European indentured servants and enslaved Africans marched together under the same banner, burning Jamestown to the ground and forcing Governor Berkeley to flee. When English warships arrived and crushed the rebellion, the surviving elites gathered to assess the wreckage. The Esquire lesson of Bacon's Rebellion was crystal clear. Indentured servitude was too dangerous. Poor white men who expected land at the end of their contracts would always rebel when those promises were broken. The solution was a total transformation of the American economy. Over the next 2 decades, the importation of European indentured servants was systematically phased out, replaced by a massive expansion of the transatlantic slave trade. The Virginia Slave Codes of 1705 stripped enslaved Africans of every civil right, establishing a rigid, race-based caste system designed to endure for centuries. Beside John in the long tobacco rows worked Victor, a tall, lean Dutchman with sun-bleached hair and weathered hands, and James Gregory, a Scotsman whose body bore the scars of years of hard labor. Victor had fled poverty in the Low Countries only to find himself trapped in the swampy heat of Virginia. James had been swept up in political unrest in the British Isles and sold across the ocean to satisfy a debt. Different as their origins were, their present reality was identical. They were the engine of the New World, and they were being consumed alive by it. As the sun reached its zenith, casting blinding glare over the river, James wiped sweat from his eyes with a dirty sleeve and muttered under his breath, "4 more years of this, and they'll be burying me under the weeds beside the old barn." The master promised extra months on my time, just for breaking an ox yoke last spring. Victor did not look up from his work, his hoe cutting rhythmically into the earth. "You'll keep adding years until you're too old to walk, Scotsman. That is the game. They write the contracts, and they hold the pen." John Punch listened, his eyes sweeping the tree line at the edge of the plantation. Beyond the cleared fields lay a wild, dense wilderness that stretched north toward Maryland, a colony founded by Lord Baltimore, where borders were porous and rumors of freedom whispered through the woods. "The contracts do not matter if we are not here to read them," John said softly.